Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
The silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. I'm Scott Parkin, your co-host in Berkeley, California today. And as always, for Scrappy Sunday, I'm joined by
Bob Bazanko in Ohio. It's a Scrappy Father's Day also. So
it is a Scrappy Father's Day.
All you dads or whatever's
fake
out
dads,
there.
Fake that, all of our fake dads.
All kinds of everybody. We're in a big community. We're all part of the same family. So happy.
It takes a village. It takes a village.
That's what Hillary's told us, right?
I think there was a book. There's also a book that she wrote called "What Happened," and so what happened?
What happened? It's like Fred Willard, right? And Guffman.
Best in show.
one of our great actors, one of our underappreciated actors. You know why I like this podcast, and I'm sure all the people out there listening and watching say, this podcast makes you smarter, like I was thinking about that the other day. All the interviews we do, like I learned from so many of these people because it's stuff I don't really know that much about. So
I agree. I think it's a very important contribution to, the discourse, I guess you could say.
Yeah, no, I mean, just on a very fundamental level, like I've learned at a fairly good level now, stuff that I really was not really aware of, like I could, sound bites, but, we talked to so many, especially the people who are actually out there doing stuff, the people in the streets, the activists, or the people working on Cop City, and just, like I learned so much, from them. So it's educational, as Homer might say.
Yep.
Homer, the head of safety at the nuclear power plant.
Right. I think we did a lot of informing with that recent episode on nuclear power.
Yeah, it's made us even more popular among certain groups.
Yeah, the Brooklyn socialists and their pro-nuclear industry funded buddies don't seem to appreciate that episode. We've actually been seeing some feedback about that on Twitter this week. So
nuclear weapons bad, nuclear power good.
I actually think the tweet would say it was awesome. It was awesome.
Awesome.
They said,
because they're very different things, right? So anyway, we could go on like this, but we always start with our kind of another thing we don't really, we should really emphasize a little more. And we give you great radical history here. And we've been doing that on the Scrappy Sundays, and that's a lot of fun. So this week we have a bunch of stuff to talk about. I think you want to start. What happened at this particular time in mid-June that our the Green and Red Gang and the M19 Brigade and all of them should know about.
Yeah, the two things I wanted to bring up were on June 12, 1963. U.S. civil rights leader Medgar Evers was shot dead by white supremacist Byron De La Beckwith, who was a card-carrying member of the Ku Klux Klan. De La Beckwith actually spent most of the 30 years after he shot Evers walking around free until a prosecutor in Jackson, Mississippi decided to do something about it. And then De La Beckwith was convicted in 1994. And so, justice delayed. It saddens me that he was able to live a full life for 30 years and Medgar Evers wasn't, but I'm glad he finally did end up getting some sort of justice. And then the other, a little bit longer than a week ago, on June 6, 2020, right after the police murder of George Floyd, we saw the first protest that exploded for the rest of the year and into 2021. But in that first week, we saw 500,000 people protest in 550 cities across the U.S. for Black Lives Matter, which is an often referenced point in history that, when we're talking about current politics and things like that on Green and Red podcast, we often reference the summer of 2020. So just wanted to mention that as well.
And also on June 14th is Comrade Ernesto Che Guevara's birthday. So
happy birthday.
Feliz cumpleaños, Comrade Che. I have a few things I want to mention. June 19th, 1964.
I believe it was also, just not to be a Debbie Downer or wet blanket, I also believe June 14th is the birthday of former President Donald J. Trump. So
is it really?
Yeah, according to Lindsey Graham on Fox News.
Well, he would know, right? June 19th, 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, Civil Rights Act, Civil Rights Law. Really important, I think, because what we're seeing today is kind of an attack against it in many, many different ways, and even more so the voting rights law. But the Civil Rights Act essentially ended the legal system of apartheid in the South. It got rid of those laws that allowed for the discrimination against people based on race. And it created, it gave people, it acknowledged that everybody has rights that everybody has just by virtue of being born, whereas kind of African Americans in the South were not being, given the same legal status as whites were. And so the civil rights law is really crucial, one of the more important pieces of civil rights legislation in all of US history, unfortunately, been attacked now for quite some time. And with the current Supreme Court, we're going to see even more of that. We've seen it, and we're going to see even more of that. On June 20th, 1893, the American Railway Union was founded. And of course, one of the leaders was Eugene Victor Debs. And a year later, the ARU would become more known nationally during the Pullman strike, which we've mentioned before. The ARU was going to try to use the Pullman strike to kind of spur off into a more like a national strike of 1877, but that didn't happen due to the power of the state and also the failure of other unions, especially the FFL, to support them. And then one I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a little more detail on June 23rd, 1947, the Taft-Hartley Act was passed. And this is probably the most onerous and most effective from the ruling class's point of view piece of labor legislation or anti-labor legislation in US history. I want to spend a little time, and there's something I've written about it, so I'm going to kind of go off that. Harry Truman vetoed Taft-Hartley, and his veto was overridden. So basically the liberal interpretation of this is that Truman was kind of heroic and vetoed it and tried to help labor, but the Republicans would let him. But there's, as often is the case, right, there's more to it than that, which is why I used to call this the history they didn't teach you in school, not just because it's kind of overlooked, but also because there's a lot of it about this that's uncomfortable for liberals as well. Taft-Hartley came out of the kind of labor situation in World War II. During the war, labor, and had done this in World War I as well, agreed that it wouldn't go on strike, and that its wages, they wouldn't clamor for higher wages, so they were essentially frozen, and they had to deal with rationing and all that other kind of stuff. But afterward, as the war was winding down, and once the war ended, they would begin to organize unions and then gain more pay and benefits. And much of this came out of the momentum from the previous decade when when the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act, was passed. However, when that happened, the bosses, weren't in what they would consider a charitable mood, even though they had just made insane profits throughout the war. And so instead of recognizing labor's right to organize or to have higher wages or to bargain collectively or even go on strike, which has always been a sticking point, right? They began to attack labor. They called them communists, right? This is the early years of the Cold Scare. And the AFL and CIO were particularly vulnerable to these attacks, especially the CIO being communist. And so it was hard for labor even to talk about its problems. This domestic containment, which is the term we often use for it, shut down not just like actions or strikes, but ideas. Labor wasn't threatening any kind of violence or anything like that. And was actually very patriotic during the war. Unions in the United States were very conservative and docile, especially if you compare it to Europe in those years. The European labor had a significant left and communist component, which led to, significant levels of subversion and I guess what the American exception people would call the deep state or whatever, right? It's foreign policy, right? US foreign policy is to get rid of the left. But this is where Harry Truman comes in, because Truman did not want to be all that closely associated with labor, much like FDR, really, in the 30s. FDR had his moments, but for the most part, really wanted to keep a distance from, what were considered the more radical elements of labor. Now, Truman's role in this is useful because, for a long time, as I said, liberals have kind of valorized him as the person who tried to stop this. In reality, Truman didn't want to be too closely associated with labor, especially the CIO, which actually did have some communists in it, some of their best organizers, in fact. in his 1947 State of the Union address, Truman proposed laws to curb strikes and to ban secondary boycotts, right? Which is something you're familiar with, like when you protest against banks or insurance companies that are doing business with your particular employer, your particular target, or something like that. Truman, who's a New Deal Democrat, laid the groundwork for more intense anti-labor action. And that kind of set the stage for issues that would be much more troubling for labor. Congress was already doing its best to try to overturn the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act, and Taft-Hartley, which was proposed in 1947, Senator Robert Taft of Ohio and Congressman Fred Hartley of Michigan were the sponsors of it. And that became the most damaging anti-labor law, in post-war history. One Texas Democrat said that Congress had to protect what he called, quote, the public interest against the actions of power-drunk labor bosses. So significant members of the Democratic Party were saying that the real issue in America was these power-drunk labor bosses, right? Obviously, that conception that the labor leaders were drunk with power was widely shared by politicians and by the media. And then, of course, by the public. It was obviously very far from the truth, too. Labor never had any kind of power compared to the ruling class. Labor's power is tiny compared to the bosses. Labor could organize. It could, in some cases, go on strike legally, often not. We've talked about that, many times. The great interview we did with Stott Lynn in one of our first shows ever. So the bosses could get national policies. They have like this kind of countless number of strategies that regard, every level of workplace action. They could attack unionization, collective bargaining, wages, and strikes. And then most importantly, they were able to attack this and connect it all to the Red Scare. So it was very difficult for unions to get new members, to get higher wages, to go on strike, because these allegations that they were communist or communist-led were just kind of coming down upon them. And so Taft-Hartley wasn't that hard to sell. Representative Fred Hartley, in fact, had received the AFL's endorsement when he ran in 1946. And he said that he was a friend of the unions. I'm a friend of the unions, he said, but he said, as a result of labor laws ill-conceived and disastrously executed, the American working man has been deprived of his dignity as an individual. That specific law that deprived labor of its dignity as an individual, according to Hartley, was the Wagner Act, right? So they wanted to dismantle that. Liberal media like the New York Times endorsed Taft-Hartley. The New York Times, the voice of liberalism in America, said the limitations set on former union privileges have seemed to us to be a needed protection of the rights of the management, the individual worker, and the public. Labor saw through those efforts to help it, and they opposed it, vigorously, although it really didn't do any good. In May of 1947, the Senate and House passed Taft-Hartley, which curtailed the rights of labor to go on strike, created like mandatory cooling down periods. It's been invoked by, most recently, Jimmy Carter invoked it. I think Clinton did. Biden, basically the railroad workers, that was kind of a component of Taft-Hartley. So the Taft-Hartley Act is vigorously
was the air traffic controller strike in the 81 or whatever.
I don't know if that was or not. It may have been, but I mean, it's certainly kind of the same, general idea, right? And so labor unions, who had sacrificed during the war, they had put, on hold their wage and other concerns, and expected to get some kind of resolution of that after the war. It ended. Instead, were met by this fierce counterattack, accusations of being communist, accusations of being treacherous and disloyal, just like after World War I, right? You also saw a big wave of strikes in 1946 and early 1947. So labor was clearly, kind of on the offensive in this. The ruling class wasn't going to tolerate that. The idea that they should just have better wages and benefits was just communism, right? As far as they were concerned. So Congress responded harshly with the Taft-Hartley Act. And even though Truman vetoed it, it passed with a lot of Democratic votes. And Truman itself had helped set the atmosphere, create the atmosphere in which Taft-Hartley became a reality. So I think that's worth noting, it's worth mentioning, that was 76 years ago. And Labor's kind of been, Labor's been beaten up pretty badly ever since then. It's been pretty rough ever since then.
Well, on one side, they've been beaten up pretty bad. On the other side, they've just been the puppets of the bosses.
Yeah, and that's really, I think, one of the important parts here, because the attack on Labor as being communist, that there were some elements in the CIO that actually were, but the CIO purged these people like the universities purged people even before the government really didn't even have to do that, right? And instead of kind of standing up to that and maintaining, they kind of shrunk as well. They did oppose Taft-Hartley, but they had kind of caved on so many other issues, and they had kind of let this ruling class idea that, America had this problem of the left that it had to attack, which was the case in Europe. There was a legitimate labor left in Europe. United States, there really wasn't. And so, ever since then, it's really been, a big backtracking for labor in the United States. You had some moments, LBJ in the 60s where unions were still pretty vigorous, but, really in the 50 some years since then, that spirit of Taft-Hartley has dominated American politics and American labor. So it's it's important. It's worth knowing, and it's worth knowing it within its larger context. So now I think I'm going to do a little bit of our Scrappy Sunday kind of ranting and raving. And what do you think, Scott? Cornel West is going to run for president, and I know I have some thoughts on that, and I just wondered what you thought about it.
Well,
shipped our millionth monthly
Sorry about that. We're good.
We'll cut that one too. Yeah, the first thing I just want to preface this with is I have a lot of respect for Cornel West. He's to be honest, he's on a bucket list to get on the podcast. And I think he's an important figure in American politics today. I think his critique of Obama during the Obama years was very important. I think his participation in social movements from Ferguson to Charlottesville to the 2020 uprisings were important. I think intellectually he contributes a lot, and he's been fierce, and he's been out on the streets. I do think that part of it is I think my politics are just not geared towards electoral politics. I follow electoral politics. I like to make jokes about Trump and the zombie Democrats and everything else. But as far as where I think people in the left or even the liberal left should be putting their time and resources, I don't think it should be in these chaotic presidential campaigns, from Nader to Jill Stein to Cornel West, and I think that there's a lot better use of, and Bernie Sanders too, and I think there's a lot better use of movement time and energy and resources that's all going to go into organizing for Cornel West and donating for Cornel West and fundraising for Cornel West, and so like I said, I have a lot of respect for Cornel West, and I have great admiration for him, but I also think that this is not the best. This is not the best move that could be happening right now. I have a couple other things to say about what's going on with him, but I'll let you share your thoughts.
Yeah,
initial thoughts.
I'm not going to be as nice. Like, Cornel West, what the hell are you thinking? All right, you're right. Cornel West was this public intellectual throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And did a lot of, stuff that you could respect, but, wasn't deeply involved in politics, but really kind of came out punching in the Obama years and made a lot of enemies among liberals and Democrats. And as you pointed out, since then, he's been very active in, Black Lives Matter and movements against police brutality. He was at Charlottesville in 2017 and actually spoke very positively about the role Antifa played in protecting him and others there.
And
so
in Ferguson in 2014 too.
Yeah. So, he's one of the good ones, no doubt. At the same time, I think this is nuts. I think it's narcissistic, and I don't think it really makes good political sense. Not because, as the liberals are upset, he's going to take votes away from Biden. I don't really know if he will, and I don't really care. You're allowed to vote for whoever you want. And we've never really kind of been, I've never been one to attack people like that. I mean, I'll defend Ralph Nader forever in 2000. Al Gore didn't even win his own state. So, but at the same time, I think you hit on the key point, which is something we've talked about a lot, and I think is more critical than ever. Presidential campaign, any campaign, right? But presidential campaigns don't organize masses of people for long-term political change. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we need more than anything. And these campaigns are chaotic and absolutely. But what do they get you at the end of the day? We've pointed out this many times, even recently. Bernie Sanders' campaign raised, I think in 2020, some insane amount of money. He broke records, something like $180 million by January of 2020. And the Democratic Party just got together and they, linked up and they defeated him. They booted him out, right? Harris and Buttigieg and Klobuchar and everybody kind of joined together. Beto O'Rourke, they all joined together and they took care of Bernie Sanders. And in 2016, the same thing had happened with the Hillary Clinton clue. Even though they blame Sanders. So basically, Sanders
and Jill Stein, they throw a lot of
and Jill Stein
the
and
Green Party candidate.
Well, Nader and everybody, right? And so this is what the Democrats do. They're going to blame you no matter what, which is neither here nor there. Who cares? But at the same time, what came out of those? Now I know people say, "Oh, there's 100 DSA representatives all across the country." That's great, better than not having them. But at the same time, it's a country of 330 million people, and I'm not sure what these kind of DSA people in New York or Chicago are really kind of doing to make the left a more potent force nationally. Cornel West isn't even really that well known that he's going to go out there and have kind of Nader, everybody knew, right? Cornel West, if you're on the left, you probably know who he is. And, he can, he has some views that will kind of attract the kind of Fox crowd, right? Because some of the stuff he says, which, is very negative about people like Obama and Biden, will sit well. And I think he's right. But it's just this fetish about elections that I think is deadly. I guess he's running as a Green now. He was going to run the People's Party ticket, which is kind of a nutty party, which is not really existing.
I also think that's a pretty weak way to get started too. If you switch about a week later, switch the party that you're running with.
I'm not sure what kind of ballot access they're going to have, but the fact of the matter is the Green Party in the United States is pretty much on a morphine drip, and it has been for a long time. Nader invigorated it simply because it was Ralph Nader, but he didn't really do any party organizing or Green organizing. It was just kind of a vehicle for Nader. And I think that's what it would be here too. And in the long term, Cornel West does have access to media and access to funding that very few people on the left would have. Absolutely. But I just think it would be exponentially better, amazingly, immensely better to use that to, talk about climate change, talk about union organizing, talk about foreign policy. He speaks very powerfully about the rights of Palestinians. He speaks out against sanctions. He's spoken powerfully about Cuba. So, it's hard to find much about him that you would disagree with. I know liberals are upset because he said some kind words about Ron DeSantis. His point was that part of the Florida reform is that it will promote teaching of the classics, which has always been an issue with Cornel West. And so it's not really that he values Ron DeSantis. I think he's quite aware of what a horrible, evil, ignorant human Ron DeSantis is. But, liberals kind of pick that one point out and go after him about that. But to me,
I heard an interview with Joan Walsh, who used to be the executive editor of Salon.com, and essentially was saying that, this is like the liberal attack on Cornel West, which is like similar to the Sanders attack and the Nader attack, which is Cornel West supports, Ron DeSantis's education reform efforts. It's garbage.
Yeah, it is. And in their mind, instead of saying we should maybe find a different candidate because Joe Biden has met some more, there maybe, instead of saying we need to hold the Democrats accountable or we need to force them to do something about abortion rights or gun control or healthcare, instead of that, they look for monsters to destroy, Nader, Stein, Jesse Jackson, long before that, Bernie Sanders, the big one, right? And, they would rather go after these people and blame them rather than, just kind of do a very mild, a superficial reflection of what Hillary Clinton did in 2016 should have her banished forever. She should not be part of the public display, the public debate on any of this stuff, just because she's not as bad as Trump, obviously, but that's a fairly low bar, and although if you ask the people in Honduras and Libya, she's as bad as Trump. So, but the point is, this fetish about elections,
What
especially
happened? What
presidential.
happened?
Yeah. I mean, I'm seeing people on the left, the Jacobin crew, they're upset because Bernie Sanders isn't going to run as a Democrat where he could actually hurt Biden. Like, we're seeing, like, what is it? Kennedy and Marianne Williamson combined, I think are over 30%, right? Bobby, RFK Jr. is much better known than Cornel West. He's a loon. He's crazy. RFK is, Cornel West isn't. But the point is,
and it has and like supports things like the stop the steal and things like that.
Oh, he's also a very hardcore believer and supporter of the Zionist Israel, in Israel. So I guess the point here is simply because I'm seeing a lot of people on the left who are, really excited about this. The Greens are excited, Jacobin's excited, Cornel West is running for president. And the question I have all the time when these things happen, which is a very basic question that I don't think the left asks itself very often, is what's your end game? Very simple question. What is your end game? What are you trying to do here? And at the end of the day, what are you trying to do with a Cornel West president candidacy, right? I mean, if you lose, which you're going to do, and the Democrats blame you for losing, then I'm not sure how that helps anybody, although I don't really give a shit about it either. I don't care about the Democrats. But there got to be countless ways. I mean, I remember during the Bernie Sanders campaign, every time we had an activist on, Jake or Scott Crow or a bunch of people, I would say to them, Bernie Sanders has just raised whatever, $100 million. What could you do with a tenth of that? And their eyes would light up, right? And I know you as an organizer, imagine what you could do if you could get the kind of money and funding that Cornel West does. Now people say, well, Cornel West is going to bring these issues up. That's not the way the media covers these things. The whole point of Cornel West candidacy is going to be whether he's going to be hurting Biden, whether he's going to be hurting the Democratic Party. So what issues he brings up, are going to be brought up only within the context of him running for president, and they're going to be, secondary. So if Cornel West really wants to do something, I would suggest starting some kind of a national movement, a national campaign, the kinds we've seen before with like civil rights movement, the no nukes movement, labor organizing. There's a lot of ways you can organize people over issues, over concerns, over long-term pressing problems like healthcare without running for president. And the presidential campaign is going to sidetrack a lot of other things. It's going to get people away from the kind of work they're doing to work on Cornel West's campaign. Look at how many people, jumped into the Bernie Sanders bandwagon. Now, some of them did continue work after that too. But, the fact is there are ways to organize and a countless number of issues. It could be the restoration of democracy. It could be a non-interventionist anti-imperial foreign policy. It could be labor rights, union organizing. It could be climate change. It could be reproductive rights, guns. There's a ton of stuff out there. However, the issue is going to be Cornel West is running for president. How is that going to affect Biden? And that's going to be the issue everywhere. It's going to be on the left and the right. If you would remove that obstacle of the election issue and begin a national movement on these issues, which is what we've been saying really forever. I mean, that was the reason I think it was important for Trump to lose, right? Because you would create some space where you could do this. Well, it's not really been happening all that much. As you can see, the Democratic Party is as weak and brain dead. They're possums, they like surrender and play dead. And we see that time and again. Trump has dominated the debate and still is. And so I don't see how Cornel West candidacy for president is going to do anything other than get more people pissed off about him, about the Greens, about the left, and everything else. And I don't really give a shit about Biden, but at some point you do want to reach out and expand your base. And I just think at this point, there are just many, many ways, a lot of issues on which the majority of Americans support the same kinds of positions we have. And I think Cornel West I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know if it's a vanity campaign. I don't know who suggested this, who's advising him. But I think West and the Greens and Jacobin and all these people. Chris Hedges. I mean, these are people, some of them I respect, some not so much. But I'm not sure what their end game is here. What's the end game? What are you trying to gain out of this? pissing people off. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've done plenty of that. You've done plenty of that. But at the end of the day, you want to get something out of it. And I'm not sure that tactically this makes any sense at all. And it just perpetuates this fetish, this lefty election fetishism, which is just a horrific, I think, a terrible, trait and, a bad strategy for all of us.
I mean, I think that other components, I think, and I think you touched on this, which I think are important, are there'll be a backlash against people who are much more left of center than liberals and the centrist Democrats, and which makes all of our life much harder. We've already talked about how it's a big consumption of energy and resources and attention, particularly. And Cornel West didn't just run in the primaries. It won't be over by next spring or next summer. It'll be over in the fall of 2024. So that's even more attention taken away from people working on vital issues. So there's all of that. I also think that I find it fascinating that, I guess Jacobin and Democratic Socialists of America focus on like local elections, and try and get people elected to state legislatures and state houses and school boards and things. I don't know that the Greens do that much. I know the Greens are on 30 state ballots or something, which is part of the reason probably West switched from the People's Party to Green Party. But how many local elections do the Greens run in nationally? I never see any kind of evidence that actually happens that much. And then to do organizing to bring about change. And I think the next thing I'm going to talk about here is a little bit of where that happened on the right. But I think that is an important thing that the left seems to really be missing, is that sort of like local grassroots organizing, even if it's getting people elected to things. I know that there are some base building organizations doing that work, mostly on the umbrella of the Democrats in particular states. Friends of mine work with a group called NC Down Home, where they got, Medicare for 600,000 North Carolina residents based on like local organizing, local elections organizing. But this sort of national, let's run, this far left candidate, this left of center candidate for president, and just let that suck up all the resources, is like, it's just unstrategic. I mean, it's not just the end game, but it's like the front game. It's just like unstrategic, and something that they seem to keep falling into every time. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We're not that powerful left in this country, if we're left at all in this country. And it seems like there's a lot of motion that we could be making without this other sort of distraction.
I mean, there's a lot going on right now, right? On the left, a lot of issues around which you could organize. There's, Cop City, obviously, Amazon labor organizing, abortion laws. And I can't see how a presidential campaign by Cornel West really affects these, because these tend to be kind of state-oriented issues. They're different in different places. And plus, I mean, a big thing right now is we're living in a country where the right wing daily hammers Biden and Harris as socialist, and they talk about the communists and the Marxists in the Democratic Party, right? We're living in a place where, they can just attack in the most insane ways possible these squishy, quisling Democratic corporatists as leftists, and the Democrats do nothing about it. And so can you imagine the venom that Cornel West is going to receive? And it's, is it worth it? I mean, you're going to catch hell no matter what, and they're going to call you a socialist and a communist. It would seem to me, if you're going to do that, you ought to do it organizing people into unions or fighting for gun control or healthcare or
tenants unions,
even local elections. I think, school board, election board, right? But you're running for president. It just seems incredibly. I mean, it's not really silly. I think it's worse than that. I just think it's arrogant, it's narcissistic, and it's just really, really bad strategy. I'm not sure what the end game is. I don't see how it's going to enable, because look, he can't win. Obviously, everybody knows that he can't win. He probably wouldn't have much of an effect on the election, but if it's close and Biden loses, it's going to lead to the Democratic Party never learns this lesson. In 2000, I remember when Nader lost, and The Nader people kept saying, we didn't do it. It was Gore. He ran a bad campaign. He lost his home state. All those things were true. Absolutely. I kept saying at the time, the Nader should say, yeah, I beat you and I'm going to do it again. And we'll keep doing it until you fucking listen to us. But they don't do that. Jill Stein should have said that. Bernie Sanders could have said that. And they don't. They go into this apology mode. We didn't do it. We didn't want the Republicans to win. Well, if you're going to catch hell no matter what, you might as well do it while you're accomplishing something. And if that means you're helping people organize a union, you're helping farmers or people avoid eviction or whatever. There's so many different things to do. Running for president, if I were going to make a list on, like things to do to help the left get, more powerful or to get more influential, a presidential election wouldn't be anywhere on my list. I wouldn't even have it anywhere on there. I mean, it would just be so far out of my thought process. And I would think your thought process, that it wouldn't even be on the list.
Yep.
And yet,
Yep.
like these people just get all fired up about it. The Jacobin people who are particularly difficult, and they're in their heyday, and they're going to go with this, right? They're going to eat this up just like they did Bernie Sanders, right? And we need street organizing, we need community organizing, we need mutual aid, and a guy who's going to be raising a shit ton of money to try to get on media to run a campaign for president. And I know he's going to try to raise these issues. I get that. But the fact of the matter is the media is not going to care. For the media, the issue is going to be, how is this going to affect Biden and Trump? And that's one I would stay out of. You're dealing with two really horrendous candidates, two old and addled people, two corporate hacks who are going to run like a really ugly and stupid campaign. And the media is not going to see West as the voice of reason and all this. They're just going to turn it into an even bigger spectacle. And, if the left, not just Cornel West, if everybody would back off from this kind of thing and start thinking about how can we organize at different levels on different issues where we have a chance to win. Isn't that a crazy thought?
No.
Let's think about where we might win, where we might succeed, right?
Yep.
No, let's go on these Quixote campaigns surrounding a big personality like Sanders or Nader or West. Let's do that instead of figuring out where we can win and what we need to do.
Yep.
I know, I suspect the people in Cop City right now who are getting, the full fury of the state aren't really all that concerned about a Cornel West candidacy for president. So That's my rant and rave. Cornel, we love you. You have an invitation. We'd love to have you on anytime, but don't run for president. There's a lot of other stuff you can do.
Yep.
You start a new poor people's campaign. I know they tried to do that a couple of years ago, but you're better known. Maybe
there's one going on now.
There's one
with
going
William
on,
Barber.
right, with Barber,
Yeah.
but maybe Cornel West would have better luck. He's better known, right?
Yep.
But stay away from elections and the media spectacle and kind of get down there with the grassroots and do your thing, because we do like you, but we think this is a big mistake. It's a big mistake. Don't do it. Don't do
Yep.
it. We'll give you come on and you can explain all you want, and we'll give you the microphone, all right? So come on and join us and tell us why we're wrong, right?
Yeah. Just switch to the next topic. The other another, I would say it's an important thing that happened this week is that Pat Robertson died at the age of 93. And where we talk about respect and admiration for Cornel West, it's like the opposite we have for Pat Robertson. There's been a lot of amusing memes going around about how Pat Robertson finally met his maker, and it's not the maker he expected to meet. My favorite personal meme was the 700 Club logo, where the 700 was crossed out and said the 699 Club.
699 Club, yeah.
Yep. But Pat Robertson was actually an evil figure. Like, just to be real, when I was a kid growing up, it was before we even had cable. We had Channel 39, and every day was the 700 Club on, which was this sort of almost like a news sort of program where Pat Robertson was like Merv Griffin at a desk, where you had Jim and Tammy Faye or Oral Roberts or Jimmy Swaggart all preaching from the pulpit and being loud and moving with the spirit or whatever. Pat Robertson was much more calm at this desk, giving us the news with his own particular set of crazy ideas and evil ideas. And Pat Robertson is like a key figure in the development of the Christian coalition through the 70s and 80s in the US, which became actually a powerful political force. He laid the groundwork through a media platform, which was the Christian Broadcasting Network. He started a university called Regent University. He actually even took over the law school at Oral Roberts University, so there could be these, so there could be lawyers who practice law with Christian values. And there's, a number of lawyers today, including like Trump's personal lawyer, Jay Sekulow, who, went through that law school, Dan Cannon, who ran for governor of Maryland last year, who was also a January 6th participant, went to that law school. And so, Pat Robertson actually did a lot to lay this groundwork for the Christian coalition and today's culture wars, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the anti-LGBTQ culture war legislation that we're seeing, lots of anti-discriminatory laws which are being challenged in the courts. A lot of that is actually coming from this sort of far right Christian coalition, sector of right-wing politics. And then Pat Robertson in 1988 did really well when he ran for president. He did well, particularly in the Iowa caucuses and in the South. And after that, sort of set himself up as a kingmaker in the GOP, which sort of solidified his position of power. I just want to sort of acknowledge this. There's some other things I'm going to say too, though. I was going to see if Bob had any comment about Pat Robertson.
Just a couple. Robertson, if you look at the kind of stuff that DeSantis and Abbott, in particular, the most fetid of these folks are saying today, it comes out of Robertson's playbook, right? Where feminists and lesbians who practice witchcraft and want to kill their husbands and all this crazy stuff, immigrants, abortions are the reason for all that happens in America. After 9/11, Robertson and Jerry Falwell basically said that, God was punishing the United States because of gay rights and abortions and feminism and all that kind of stuff. So he really did have an impact. I want to do just the only thing I really want to say is speak to that presidential campaign, because we just got done saying Cornel West shouldn't run, and we talked about Pat Robertson running. There's a significant difference there, because by the time Pat Robertson ran for president, he had already created, well, he was very well known, probably better known than Cornel West is today. But more importantly, he had created a really solid and national organization. The far right, the new right, whatever you want to call it, from the 60s on, knew how to organize. And so the CBN and the 700 Club and Robertson's various enterprises were really well established by the time he ran for president. He wasn't running for president kind of just as this guy who happened to be, out there in the media. He was running, as somebody who had helped organize a really powerful national network that by the late 80s, if not had taken over the Republican Party, really has significant levels of influence within it, right? And so there's a huge difference. I mean, Cornel West doesn't have this kind of organizational background. He doesn't have these organizations behind him. He doesn't have a daily TV show that goes out to millions based around this organizing principle that God is going to punish you if you don't do what he wants or what the GOP wants or whatever. So, Robertson's presidential campaign probably did help the movement, but only because he had spent so many years before that doing organization at a local level. And by that time, by the late 80s, when Robertson was running, people associated with him were already, being elected, and had been for quite some time, actually, to school boards, to election boards, to local offices, and were making their way up the food chain to Congress and to Senate seats. So, I don't think they're really comparable at all. I think, if West had that kind of organizational background, then it might help a little. But, and then Robertson, keep in mind too, he did win Iowa or New Hampshire. Was it Iowa in 88? He won in Iowa, right? But then his campaign fizzled and he just kind of got out after that. And, at that point, no one ever said, Pat Robertson is the reason George Bush lost or anything like that, because he ran in 92 again, too. He just didn't do as well,
Pat Robertson ran in 92.
I think he ran again in 92, but I think he fizzled out early.
I thought
Buchanan ran in 92 too.
Yeah, I thought it was just Bush and Buchanan.
And I thought he maybe not, but it was kind of, he was still there. He was still part of that program. But the point is, I just don't think they're comparable. And so,
No.
but I mean, as much as you hate to say it, studying the moral majority and Pat Robertson's movements and Phyllis Schlafly isn't a bad idea if you want to figure out how to organize people, because grudgingly or not, you got to admit they did a pretty good job of it. And I don't think you'd be seeing what we're seeing today in places like Texas and Florida and elsewhere without that groundwork being laid. And so, the Republicans, for whatever it's worth, always understood that you have to kind of organize people, and you can't just kind of, I mean, they do plenty of fear, right? The liberals are going to do this, the liberals are going to do that. But the reality is they also went into the grassroots and they organized people. And the Democratic Party really doesn't have much of a record of that at all. And even labor, when you see labor today, we've talked before about kind of a renaissance among labor, but it's really not the big unions doing that. We're actually seeing that at, Starbucks, at Trader Joe's, at
Amazon,
at a lot of little kind of local indie coffee shops and bookstores and things like that. And so, Cornel West, if you want to be more like Pat Robertson, we get it. We don't want to be like Pat Robertson, but if you want to do that, start organizing, at a grassroots level nationally. And then, 10, 12 years from now, you can run for president and we won't say anything about it. So,
yeah, I want to say one other thing about Pat, because I think this is important as well, is that while he was, building this sort of Christian, I hate to call it grassroots network, but he was laying the landscape for this sort of Christian coalition political landscape. He was also very supportive of right-wing dictatorships abroad. Most notably Rios Montt, who was the dictator in Guatemala. Montt had a coup where he took over the Guatemalan government in 1982. Rios Montt committed horrific crimes against Guatemala's indigenous people. And, we're talking numbers of 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 people, which were murdered by the death squads and by the Guatemalan government and military. Pat Robertson, but Rios Montt was even though it's a largely Catholic country and he was born and raised Catholic, was actually a born again evangelical. So Pat Robertson was all about him. And so the week that he won the coup and took over in Guatemala, Pat Robertson said, "God, we pray for Rios Montt, your servant, Lord, that you would cover him." And so I just want to say all this good Christian down home folksy 700 club is all bullshit. He supported brutal dictatorships. He supported the South African apartheid regime, where they actually even had an Afrikaans language version of the Second 100 Club going on in South Africa.
Yeah.
And supported white supremacist militias in Mozambique, which also killed 100,000 people, one called Renamo, or the Mozambique National Resistance. And so also supported Israel and Netanyahu, even though he also circulated lots of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory in the US. So, he is one of the people who sold right-wing dictatorships to this Republican base, Christian base in the US. I think that's important to note as well.
Actually, throughout the 60s and especially the 70s and 80s, there was this really significant kind of missionary movement into Latin America, because Latin America had traditionally been Catholic, which, gave rise to some of the most repressive regimes. In the Catholic Church by itself, we know is very repressive, but it also gave rise to liberation theology. And, I think it was really important that in that region, you had these ministers or these missionaries from the United States, from these evangelical and Pentecostal groups going down there and having great success in converting people to these kind of more evangelical, doctrines. And, Rios Montt is an obvious example of that. But, you had these people who were active in Honduras and in Nicaragua and El Salvador, working often with the kind of conservative Catholic reactionaries too. So, I mean, not just were these people, really malignant here at home, creating this hatred against, women, against feminists, against gay people, whoever, immigrants, right? But they really did have a global reach. And, I don't know if you want to call it grassroots or not, but there's something there that I think it succeeded. I mean, you can't deny that it fucking succeeded, no matter how much you hate them. And, obviously we do. They got what they wanted, and they're very powerful now, even though I don't think any of their positions have majority support, right? But it doesn't matter. They've somehow managed to gain control of the political system. And you're not going to do that by running a celebrity for president. right?
No.
Anyway, Pat Robertson, hopefully Henry Kissinger will be gone soon. It'll be the 698 Club, so if we're lucky. Right?
Although Kissinger probably isn't going to be led into the 700 Club because of his.
No, he's Jewish. He can't be, right?
Yeah,
it's crazy. That's the part I'll never understand that, and I've kind of given up trying. Like, how the hell you can be like really viciously anti-Semitic, but then be this huge supporter of Israel too, right? And then Israel claims that anybody who doesn't support them is anti-Semitic, right? So, you have all these Jewish intellectuals who are now being branded anti-Semitic by the Israeli state, and all these crazy ass people, evangelicals in the United States who think Jews are damned, are in good stead. So it's screwed up shit. Yeah, Robertson in the history of the 20th century was a pretty malignant figure, and we should remember that.
Yep. I think the last thing we're going to talk about is another passing, which is a figure that we're more friendly towards. This week, at the age of 89, Cormac McCarthy, one of the great American novelists of the 20th and 21st century past, notably wrote books such as Blood Meridian, The Road, which won a Pulitzer Prize, No Country for Old Men. Passed away, mostly wrote about the Appalachian South and the South American Southwest. His interpretation, his stories some of them were rooted in history, but they were dark, they were violent. He had a dark view of America. He had a lot of his stories are about the frontier. And so, I have recently said that, America reads like a Cormac McCarthy novel. And so, I just want to do a little rest in power to Cormac McCarthy. I want to read a quote by him, which is, "Life is brief, and to have to spend every day of it doing what someone else wants you to do is not the way to live it." So that's kind of a little bit of Bob and I's philosophy on many things. So, salute, rest in power, Cormac McCarthy.
And have a great Father's Day.
Yep.
For those of you out here listening, and a great June, and check out some of the more recent stuff we've done. We're on a big roll here. We've had shows on nuclear energy and why it's not a good idea for the left. We talked to the director of How to Blow Up a Pipeline,
Daniel Goldhaber.
We're a really cool show coming up with Sophia McLennan, who wrote a book about the use of comedy to go after Donald Trump, the kind of comedians versus Trump, which is really kind of a lot of fun to talk about.
Yep.
And I'm sure I'm forgetting some other stuff, but we have a Ukraine update, which will be fun. We've already gotten some blowback.
I just went live this week.
Yeah, we already have people pissed off at us about that because we're still saying that there should be a peace in Ukraine. We need it now, right? Mark Milley today said it's going to be more violent there, right? So it's crazy. We're invoking Mark Milley against people who call themselves socialists. So
the NATO left, if you will.
That makes me wonder about a lot of these people who call themselves socialists. But so we have a lot of stuff. We have a lot of good stuff coming up. We are going to be doing a lot of stuff on JFK starting soon here, because it is the 60th anniversary of his assassination, and the crazy right wingers are out in force. They're even more powerful than ever. Bobby Kennedy Jr. is pimping this. Democracy Now!, which I've never had much value for anyway. But they're, kind of pimping this idea that, Kennedy gave a speech for peace 60 years ago, and he was going to end the Cold War and all this. It's utterly ahistorical. It ignores just immense mountains of evidence. You can have a speech where Kennedy says some pretty words, or you can look at what he really did. And so, bad news there. We're going to try to talk to somebody. I think we're going to have an interview set up with somebody who just wrote a book about Frank Church, which I think is important. And we're going to be talking about conspiracies, and we're trying to organize all this stuff with some very, very fine and interesting and important guests. So
we have actually a labor show coming up too that will drop next week.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that one. Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
So tell your friends, wake up the kids, put it on the neighborhood email list, bring it to the HOA meeting, whatever it has to do, but let people know what we're doing out here, because
Yep.
we do believe it's important. Check out our radical history stuff, which is really good and really cool. And it'll make you smarter. I guarantee you it will make you smarter. I think there are studies which it adds IQ points. I'm pretty sure there are. I'll have to check on that, but I'm pretty sure
it's added IQ points to me.
I think MIT and Caltech are working on that study right now. I'm pretty sure. I forget what it is, like significant level of IQ points, 30 or 40, in fact.
Folks, you've been listening to
Kid Rock listened to an episode and got up to 25. So
yeah, he almost voted for a centrist. Hey, folks, you've been listening to Bob and Scott on Scrappy Father's Day. If you like what you're hearing, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you listen to us on our audio platforms, subscribe there as well. Also give us a rate and review, helps with the algorithms. And if you want to make a donation, go to greenandredpodcast.org, hit that support button, or go to patreon.com/greenredpodcast and become a patron of the Green and Red Podcast. We love our M19 Brigade. And so think about joining the M19 Brigade. Otherwise, everybody stay safe, make trouble, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Natural disaster in Haiti has once again thrown Haiti into the eyes of the world, and once again brought out both the best and the worst of us.
We in a state of emergency, people feeling hopeless inside. And it's sad it takes earthquakes to open our eyes. They put the truth in disguise, soak it in lies. Gotta survive, just trying to keep that notion alive. Realize, that's how the media get you. Fuck a Jersey Shore, while Mother Nature getting sicker. Off the Richter, living in fear, lost in scripture. All we see is seeing in footage and fucking pictures. They still tallying up heads lost, too many dead, and not enough fed by the Red Cross. They place blame and point a finger at FEMA. Still salty, cause they ain't do a thing for Katrina. Nah, they say we living in the last days. Bulldozers clear a pathway to a mass grave. Bury bodies by the dump truck. Just throw them in a hole with no soul, man, it's fucked up. And all they worry about's Wyclef's funny money. Smoking guns, really just a bunch of fuddy-duddies. Ugly, that's a fucking understatement. Let's see you trap for 8 days and see if you're tough enough to make it. Fresh air, all they breathe is death and dust. Those lucky enough to live ain't left with much. We in a nation full of hatred and selfish schmucks. So if they counting on the majority's help, they fuck. They'd rather donate pity than 10 pennies. No cops, no blankets or sheets for 10 cities. Shitty, but some are determined to never let go. Pay no attention to the ever-increasing death toll. I really wish that I could do something more, cause they can't even take a walk and go get food from the store. Mother Nature's like pigs, come and kick through the door. Now the walls caving in, the roof on the floor. Fuck Pat Robertson, fuck this pack with the devil. Fuck Rush Limbaugh, he can smack with a shovel. Fuck the lack of sympathy for those trapped in the rubble. Since the quake, my compassion is double. Fuck Pat Robertson, fuck his back with the devil. Fuck Rush Limbaugh, he can smack with a shovel. Fuck the lack of sympathy for those trapped in the rubble. Since the quake, my compassion is double. We in trouble.
The sheer scale of human suffering has evoked massive compassion as governments far and wide mobilize to assist those unable to assist themselves. Let us hope that Haiti's future will be brighter than its post-colonial past. From Death Row, this is Moody, Abu.